So we're diving into some fascinating research today about a new approach to prosthetic control. And I have to say, this one really caught my eye.
Oh, yeah, this is really cutting-edge stuff, pushing the boundaries of what we thought was possible with prosthetics.
Exactly, and it all starts with a challenge, right? Restoring hand function after an amputation. It's something that researchers have been grappling with for decades.
And for good reason. I mean, the human hand, it's such an incredible feat of engineering, all those bones and muscles and nerves working together in perfect harmony.
It really is amazing how much we take those subtle movements for granted.
Absolutely. Picking up a pin, tying a shoelace, it all seems so effortless. But replicating that dexterity and intuitive control in a prosthetic hand, well, that's a whole other ballgame.
It really is. And, current prosthetics, while they've come a long way, they often lack that natural fluidity that we expect from a real hand.
Exactly. There's a real need for something more, something that can truly bridge the gap between man and machine.
And that's where this research comes in, right? It's about a new kind of prosthetic control that ditches the usual nerve signals and muscle electricity for something completely different.
Yeah.
Magnets.
Yes, magnets. It's called myokinetic control, and it's all about using the muscle movements themselves as those control signals.
Okay, so walk me through this. How do magnets factor into prosthetic control?
Imagine this. Tiny magnets implanted directly into the forearm muscles. Now, these magnets, they're not sending out any electrical signals. They're just passively moving along with the muscles as they contract and relax.
So it's like having these little beacons under your skin, mapping out your muscle activity in real time.
Exactly. And that's what allows for such fine-tuned control. Instead of just detecting whether a muscle is engaged or not, this system can actually track the subtle shifts in those magnets' positions and rotations within the muscle.
Wow, so we're talking about a whole new level of detail here. It's like translating the language of your muscles into something that the prosthetic hand can understand.
That's a great way to put it. Now, they did test this out, and I think you'll be fascinated by who they worked with. The participant had a transradial amputation, meaning part or all of their forearm was missing.
And they had already been using a myoelectric prosthesis, right, for about a month before this study.
Exactly. They had a good feel for how the existing technology performed, which makes their experience with the myokinetic prosthesis even more interesting.
So they had a basis for comparison. That's really valuable in a study like this.
Absolutely. Now, the surgery to implant these magnets, it was surprisingly quick, just about an hour and a half, using only local anesthesia and sedation.
Okay, hold on. I'm imagining these magnets going in. Were they aiming for specific locations within the muscles themselves?
That's a great question, and it highlights one of the challenges they're still working on. Ideally, you want those magnets right in the muscle belly for the strongest signal.
So they can pick up on those subtle movements more clearly.
Exactly. But to keep the procedure as minimally invasive as possible, in this study, they implanted the magnets just under the muscle fascia.
Okay, so under that thin layer of connective tissue that surrounds the muscle.
Exactly. It's a trade-off. Less invasive, but maybe a slightly weaker signal.
Makes sense. So did the participant find it uncomfortable having these magnets implanted?
You know, it's amazing. They only felt the magnets if they pressed on them directly.
So no constant awareness of them. That's pretty impressive.
Right. And get this, they even continued using their myoelectric prosthesis while they were recovering from the surgery.
No downtime. That's incredible. Okay, so we've got these magnets in place, but how does the prosthesis actually read these tiny magnetic shifts and turn them into, meaningful control signals? That's where it's really interesting, right?
It's really remarkable how they captured those subtle muscle movements. Imagine this. A grid of sensors tucked right there inside the prosthetic socket.
Okay, I'm picturing it. So these sensors are constantly monitoring the magnets.
Exactly. And here's the cool part. They're not just detecting if a muscle is engaged or not. They're actually tracking the positions of those magnets in 3 dimensions.
Really? So as the muscles contract and those magnets shift, even slightly, the sensors pick it up.
Precisely. They're even detecting the rotation of those magnet pairs within each muscle. It's like having a motion capture system miniaturized and placed right under your skin.
Wow. Talk about high resolution. That's amazing.
Yeah.
But I imagine it's not always a clean signal.
You're absolutely right. It's not always straightforward. The human body is a complex system.
So like unintended movements must throw things off.
Exactly. For instance, they found that certain elbow movements were creating interference.
Ah, so it's like trying to listen to a conversation in a crowded room. You've got to filter out the noise to focus on the right signal.
Perfect analogy. That's exactly what they had to do.
So how'd they do that? How'd they cut through the noise?
Well, they discovered that the muscles controlling the wrist's rotation, like turning your palm up and down,
Yeah.
those movements were less affected by the elbow and produced a much stronger, clearer signal.
Ah, so they focused on the cleanest channels of communication. Smart. But how do those signals actually translate into, hand movements? Did they create some kind of muscle movement dictionary for the prosthesis to follow?
That's the really ingenious part. They actually tested two different approaches. The first one, called direct control, is pretty intuitive.
Okay, so like a direct line between thought and action.
Exactly. They basically linked a specific muscle movement to the speed of the hand opening and closing.
So the harder you contract that muscle, the faster the hand closes and vice versa.
You got it. And this approach, it proved to be really stable. The participant could even control their grip strength quite easily.
Wow, so you're not just opening and closing, you're actually modulating the force. That's incredible.
Right. But they didn't stop there. They wanted to see if they could achieve even more nuanced control, so they also tested something called pattern recognition.
Oh, this is where the AI comes in, right?
Yeah.
Teaching the system to recognize different patterns of muscle activity.
You got it. They used machine learning to teach the system to recognize the unique muscle activation patterns for different grasps, wrist movements, even individual finger flexions.
No way. So it's like the system learns to read your mind, or at least your intentions. How accurate was it?
In offline testing, it was remarkably accurate. We're talking over 94% accuracy for most movements.
94%. That's incredible.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing there's a but coming.
You're right. There's always a but. While those offline results were really promising, they faced a significant challenge when it came to real-world application.
What happened? Did the accuracy drop?
Well, the accuracy was still there, but they found that the pattern recognition needed retraining each time the participant used it.
Really? Every single time? That doesn't sound very practical. Why was that?
It all comes down to those subtle variations in muscle activity and even things like the fit of the prosthetic socket. Even slight changes throughout the day, maybe a little muscle fatigue or a slight shift in the socket, could throw off those finely tuned patterns.
So it's not as simple as train once, use forever.
Unfortunately not, at least not yet. They're hopeful that with more research, they can develop more robust algorithms that won't require such frequent retraining.
Fingers crossed. Okay, so they have these two different control strategies. What do? Just hand it over to the participant and let them have at it.
Not quite. They wanted to rigorously test these strategies, really put them through their paces. So they designed a series of functional tests to see how the myokinetic prosthesis would perform in a more practical setting.
Like a prosthetic obstacle course.
Yeah.
Give me the details. What kind of tests are we talking about?
Well, they had the participant run through a battery of assessments, things like the Southampton Hand Assessment Procedure, or SHAP as it's known in the field.
Okay, and what does that measure?
It's a standard test for evaluating hand dexterity. They also use the Minnesota Manual Dexterity Test, the MMDT, which looks at hand-eye coordination. And to really push the limits, they even had them do the clothespin relocation task, the CRT.
The clothespin relocation task. What is that? Sounds pretty self-explanatory.
It is. It involves, you guessed it, moving clothespins around, which requires some pretty fine motor skills.
Okay, so a real test for precise, controlled movements. How'd it go? Were they able to hold their own against a standard myoelectric prosthesis?
That's the exciting part. In several of these tests, the myokinetic prosthesis performed just as well, if not better in some cases, than the traditional myoelectric prosthesis.
Wow, so even with those limitations we talked about, it's already going head-to-head with established technology.
It is. And there were even a few anecdotal wins that really highlight the potential here. For example, the participant was able to manipulate these really fragile objects without breaking them, which is a testament to the fine motor control they were achieving.
Wow, that's impressive.
And get this, they were even able to tie their shoelaces.
No way with this new technology. That's incredible. That's not just about picking up objects. It's about restoring those everyday movements that most people take for granted.
Absolutely. It's about giving people back their independence. And it wasn't just anecdotal either. There was a quantifiable difference in the pick and lift test.
Oh yeah, the one that looks at coordination.
Right. The pattern recognition control actually outperformed direct control in that test, showing a real improvement in motor coordination.
So not only is it matching existing technology, it's actually opening up new possibilities for even more natural movement.
Exactly. It's really pushing the boundaries of what we thought was possible with prosthetic limbs. But of course, like with any new technology, there are always areas for improvement.
It does make you wonder what else they can achieve as the technology continues to develop. Are there any other areas where this myokinetic control needs a little work?
Well, they were really upfront about the limitations, which is refreshing. One of the big ones is we've got to talk about the elephant in the room, the magnet placement. Remember how we were talking about how ideally you'd want those magnets right in the belly of the muscle?
Right, to get the strongest possible signal.
Exactly. But they couldn't do that this time around, had to go with just under the fascia.
To keep it minimally invasive.
Exactly. And, it's a balancing act. Stronger signal versus patient comfort, recovery time, all of that.
Right, finding that sweet spot. But it sounds like future research might explore ways to get those magnets closer to the muscle fibers without making the surgery more complicated.
You got it. And it wasn't just the placement. The prosthetic socket itself was causing a bit of a ruckus, too.
Really? How so?
Well, it seemed to be contributing to some of that signal noise we were talking about earlier, especially with the ED muscle, the one that helps you extend your fingers.
So the socket itself was interfering with the signals.
In a way, yes. It wasn't designed with these magnets in mind, so some of the movements were getting misinterpreted.
So it's not just about the implants themselves, it's about how the entire system works together.
100%. And they believe that by redesigning the socket, making it more accommodating to those natural arm movements, they can reduce a lot of that interference.
That makes sense. It's like you can have the best engine in the world, but if the rest of the car isn't built for it, you're not going to win any races.
I like that. And speaking of things that need work, there's also that whole retraining issue with the pattern recognition.
Right, having to retrain it every time you want to use it.
Right.
Not exactly convenient.
Not at all. But there's hope. They believe that as they refine those machine learning algorithms, they can make them more adaptable, less sensitive to those minor variations we talked about.
So it can adjust to, like, muscle fatigue or slight changes in position throughout the day without needing a complete reset every time.
Precisely. It's all about making the system smarter, more intuitive, more human-like in its ability to adapt.
It's amazing to think how far prosthetic technology has come.
It truly is. I mean, from those clunky wooden limbs to these sophisticated AI-powered devices, it's mind-blowing.
And this research, even though it's still early stages, it gives us a glimpse into a future where prosthetics don't just replace lost limbs, they actually restore that lost function.
Exactly. Imagine a world where amputees can regain that dexterity and control, performing everyday tasks with ease and confidence.
It's an incredibly exciting thought. And it's not limited to just hands either, right?
Absolutely not. Think wheelchairs, exoskeletons, even robotic limbs. This myokinetic control, it has the potential to revolutionize the entire field of assistive devices.
It's like we're on the cusp of a whole new era of human-machine interaction. One where technology truly integrates with our bodies, enhancing our abilities in ways we never thought possible.
It's incredibly inspiring. Who knows what amazing things we'll achieve in the years to come.
It's a future worth striving for. Well, on that note, we'll leave you to ponder this. What other hidden capabilities of the human body might we unlock as we continue to explore this remarkable potential of myokinetic control? Thanks for joining us for this incredible deep dive.